I'll take it from here. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for everyone for coming here. This is panel number 4 on day 2. Sure, we've had a wonderful week. It's definitely a blessing to be here. We have some panelists here that have experience that just astounded me as I got to know them. So I'm excited for you to get to know them as well. My name is Kelly Herwick. I am at Intel. I am a head of talent insights for many different areas. AI and IoT are two of the several areas that I'm looking at talent insights for. And what a better time to innovate than right before lunch. So we're ready for it. We have little mints on your table. Go for that. But who we have with us today, so let me introduce our panelists. We have Rich Duncombe. He is the Managing Director of the Innovation Catalyst Group and Director of the Oregon State University Innovation Hub. So I'm excited to have Rich join us. He has vast experience with innovation in a variety of settings, including a few decades at Hewlett-Packard. Now it would have split off, but we go with HP in the days, in various roles and putting into practice his experience as a founder of the Innovation Consulting Group. So now he's working with a team of faculty and staff across Oregon State University to test and incubate new ideas as the director of Impact Studio. It's a design studio to further the university's strategic goals. And we also have Lindsay Benjamin. So I'm eager to have Lindsay here. She is a consumer client software strategist and portfolio manager with Intel. I'm very happy to have her, given her Herculean efforts of bringing portfolio management to an area that you may least expect it at a historically hardware company. And she's also dedicated to formally bringing the practice of mindfulness into the corporate workspace. I feel like that is probably what got her through. All that she had to do was being mindful and present. And then rounding out our panel, we have David Matheson. So it's a pleasure to have David join us. He is the founder and CEO and president of SmartOrg, so wearing many hats. But he has a rich history of practical application of helping corporations create value through innovation. He has co-authored a best-selling book, so if you're looking for something to read this year, David has one for you, and recognized as a fellow with the Society of Decision Professionals. Let's give our panelists a welcome. All right.
Do a 40-minute meditation retreat.
We're going to do a 40-minute meditation, and then we've got innovation down. So what I have here, I actually found this quote recently. Innovation is created as a result of constructive conflict. Okay? You'll notice the title, Making Innovation Management Predictable. There's just a little bit of a paradox going on there, right? So I'm going to look at this panel through that lens, and we'll see what varying advice we have from our panelists. So we're going to spice this up a little bit. Hopefully you'll hear some good discussion as we go through here. So I'm going to kick this off with, innovation is organic. So making innovation management predictable, isn't that basically a lie? Rich, you want to kick us off with that?
It's a lie that I love to propagate. So, but this is the way I would tell that story. So first, I've done innovation in large organizations. 50,000 employees, 10,000 employees, and that sort of thing. So, there are three categories I think about core innovation. So, who's running all the core businesses? That's 98% of your business. That's not the space I focus on. Okay. Adjacent would be what's kind of right next to the core, and I can give some examples of that, and then the moonshots. So my focus has been on the adjacent space. And so what makes it predictable from my perspective is you gotta allocate a certain amount of funding. It depends on industry sector. There's research on this. Actually isn't dependent. Your results aren't dependent on the amount you allocate. So there has to be an allocation. Could be 5%. Could be 10, 15, whatever the industry sector is. Number one. Number two, you got to use the best practices. So in your studio, that's empathy-based design. I mean, we all know what those things are now. There's a whole set of methodologies that are proven. You got to bring those to this client or to this organization. And third is you got to have a portfolio. And from listening to Clint talk earlier, my portfolio of 20 should be probably 50. But if you put those three together, yeah, it's pretty predictable. That's what I would say.
Okay. Lindsay or David, do you have a differing opinion here?
Sure, I'll go. I have sort of two answers, maybe a more technical one or a human one to two things. So the first thing is on the technical side, people want innovation projects to be predictable. And organizations are basically run on a kind of contract, right? You make me some kind of reliable process and I will fund you in consequence. And what that does in innovation is it basically crams down innovation and makes it small. So it is completely unpredictable at the project level. As Rich alluded to, at the portfolio level, it's a lot more reliable. But the central issue is you've got to break this reliable promise method, which is deeply, deeply ingrained in organizations. I mean, they're happy to, everyone wants you to take a risk. If the project fails, you'll be fired. That's an acceptable risk to them, right? This just sets up an untenable situation. So that's sort of my maybe technical answer to that. But I have a human answer too. How many of you here are engineers? So I'm an engineer science guy. I have a daughter who's a singer. She's a diva. And I think innovation is like the relationship to parents and children. She came after me in high school because I had been pitching for many decades, Kate, you have to take calculus. And she was smart enough to do the math. And as a parent, you want to guide your children and have them grow and let them grow from your wisdom, and there's a kind of control element to it that is very, very deep. And one day she came to me and said, Dad, I'm a singer, why do I need to take calculus? And there was a personal growth moment there where I had to say, well, maybe not. And I think you're also asking people, managers, to give up control in a sort of analogous sense. And there's a deeply human element of releasing that innovation and letting it grow into what it wants to be, as opposed to what you think it should be. And that's a huge unpredictable element intrinsic to innovation.
So adding to that, we can't just tell our boss, trust me, I've got this, right? So what words of wisdom do you have to advance innovation management?
Okay, I'll answer. I mean, from what I learned going through this process is that, there's not, we're talking about things in the future that are inherently unknown. And I think for a lot of decision makers who maybe have had a lot of personal power, it's hard for them to even accept that or address it. And that the portfolio process gives us a way, or it gave us a way of breaking down these different components of our business and thinking about them, that when you put them all together, it paints a picture that does help you have some sense of predictability. And then what was your question?
Oh, we can't tell our boss, trust me, I've got this.
Right,
How
right.
do we?
So then you have instead of, again, the advocacy piece, you have all these different components that you can put together that help show the decision maker, how you got to that, recommendation.
So I think it's a great question too, and I think this would be true for entrepreneurs in the startup world, but inside of a corporate fixed unit, the only real thing you have is your credibility. And now you're an innovator, right? So you're in a domain where, by definition, your repeatability in terms of creating outcomes is greatly jeopardized. So for me, somewhere along the line, I realized that all I had was my credibility. And so the way to maintain and grow that credibility is through truth-telling. And the way, from a decision analysis perspective, to do truth-telling is through proof points. So if you give me, $100,000, I will give you this evidence. And I will execute the process to give you that evidence in a way that's very skillful, that is demonstrates my mastery. Now that evidence may tell you that you should stop, and we should stop this entire, strategy or innovation. But hopefully at that point I have maintained and may perhaps grown my credibility with you as a decision maker so that the next time, we can do this again. So it's this real dance, because if I'm assertive and just tell you, listen, this is going to change the world, which a lot of innovators are wired to do, your ice is melting and you won't be around.
Yeah, let me add another answer. I think a lot of the standard innovation response to that question is sort of go agile or go lean, right? Jump in, do something, get a minimal value, and just go. And I think we talked about this in the last panel a little bit, and that's sort of the answer to the question. And this answer it has a lot of good points, but it is really vastly incomplete. And it relates a little bit to the credibility point he's talking about. The decision analyst has a great way to move here. So let me riff on a strategy table as an example. If you can go, instead of say, produce this thing, deliver this outcome, you can say, here are 6 ways this new business could work, and my job is to figure out whether any of these is feasible. Merely having that conversation that sets it up in a choice framework empowers the decision maker and shows people that you've thought ahead. And so you can take bolder moves, bigger moves, using the gambit that Rich talked about. But I think this is a huge area for decision analysts to contribute, because Agile is basically do what's in front of you as opposed to work backwards from the ultimate outcome you're after. And so there's a gap that can be filled here with decision analysis tools.
Okay. So if we're going to be truthful, we were talking about decision quality canvas, about 45 minutes. We were talking earlier about trying to understand AI's introduction into automated decisions, taking several years. What is that proof point? The tech industry moves fast, unless you're building automated decisions in AI, apparently. No, just kidding. But so can we simply take what works in another industry and apply that to tech just with shorter timelines? What is the speed of working and being a truth teller to your decision maker on getting an innovation process in place that works?
I think it's this real balance, because I really like the decision canvas. So he laughed. So please send it to me. So that was a great example, I think, of how to apply the decision fundamentals quickly. But you have to, and I think this is the problem with the business model canvas. So he used that analogy of the business model canvas, which I do not think works very well in established organizations, because of the problem is you lose credibility. So if you are truly just running to the next step and you're experimenting to the next step and never sort of projecting to the decision makers about your thoughtfulness about where this is going, your credibility is going out the window. Now, if you're in a startup, that's what you do. You're venture funded. The venture folks are saying, go do your thing. It's a completely different situation. So I think you've got to walk that line of showing where you're going and to be able to move really fast and apply the rigor.
So, David, you have a great...
I would like to add to this,
Sure.
if I could. I think it's very context dependent. If I look at the innovation in a place like Google and Facebook, these are target-rich environments. There is a new seam for the world opened up based through the technical innovation and application. You take smart people, have them run, go. You're not going to be too far off most of the time. And so I think the speed is being driven by the kind of land grab quality of this. I work with a lot of more mature organizations. DuPont is an example, right? They invented nylon, Kevlar, Teflon, et cetera. Those are 50-year-old, 60-year-old inventions. And if you go back and look at what they were like in their glory days, it was exactly the same. They were just sending smart people off and bringing the right people together, and I've heard exactly the same kind of thing. So I think you have to look a little bit at how heavy is the lift to do something innovative, right? And if you're in a target-rich environment, sort of go. And I think even we're seeing as Facebook, Amazon, and so on are maturing, it is actually getting harder and harder to do something amazing. And they're going to have to look to more careful methods to actually figure out where their innovations drive their business growth. It just gets really, really hard.
I'm glad you brought that up, because those companies are growing. They've been huge revenue-wise. They're very much becoming maybe more on the mature side of things. But according to a study by PricewaterhouseCoopers, brands that invest heavily in R&D aren't more innovative than those that don't. And smaller companies tend to have that edge when it comes to innovation. So shouldn't large companies just acquire innovation through M&A? Wouldn't that be the best way to go?
Sure, I'll comment. although I think actually my response might be a little bit more geared toward the last question, but I think innovation happens everywhere, right? At the individual level, all the way up through, like, at big organizations, big tectonic shifts inside, industries or whatever we see as the next horizon inside high tech. And I think, like with decision quality, we have to apply it appropriately with, like, the size of the investment. So we see innovation happening, everywhere at the edge, right? At the developer level, like adding simple little features, right? These are small decisions, small investments, and those decisions should happen much faster, like almost immediately, almost kind of based on what's right in front of you, as opposed to, like you think about an Intel level type investment of how much more should we continue to invest in AI or like memory or whatever, huge multi-billion-dollar hardware infrastructure type decisions. So innovation, organic, it should happen at the individual level, and we should, continue to support that.
On the other side of that too, on the massive side for M&As, I mean, I don't have all the research, but I think it's a losing strategy. I think the data is pretty clear. I was in a company that spent $70 billion in acquisitions, and the market cap went down 90 billion. So how does that work? But it's not that unusual because these M&As require synergy. So first of all, you're buying after the thing's been de-risked. So you're paying basically full price. This is no longer, you're not getting real upside here. You're paying as if you were a, private equity firm. And then all of these things are based on synergy, which says, 1 + 1 = 5. It's usually 1 + 1 = 0.5. So I'm a huge skeptic of, now targeted M&A, absolutely. I bought a software company when I was at HP, but much smaller to bring in a specific kind of capability we needed. So I don't want to paint a really broad brush, but I think buyer beware on M&A.
Yes. So one other thing to say about large companies, small companies can only play a game at a certain kind of scale, and only the really incredibly rare thing actually gets anywhere of significance. I mean, the death rate at the scale that big companies has to play is astounding, and I'm sort of with Rich on this one. They mostly kill them. The one thing I've seen is kind of interesting in response to you is companies sort of tucking in capabilities. So I'm working with an agricultural company, for example, and they are really good at seeds and crop chemistry and all that stuff. But what's happening is the buying patterns of their the farmers, their customers, are changing, and they're developing digital marketplaces, and this sort of stuff is in play, and drones are going onto fields. It's a fascinating area. Well, how do they actually understand that? And so they have bought some small companies, and it's not clear it's going to be a success because it's pretty obvious that if you let the mothership control too much this little company, it's game over. They will just push it out. It's very tenuous. However, it is also creating a kind of dynamic tension, which is opening up a space, sort of like Lindsay's saying, where people are really starting to think differently and propose new things. These digital marketplaces aren't actually going to work, I think, unless these gigantic companies actually scale them. You may not appreciate the scale of the operations. So it remains to be seen. They might kill it, or maybe it'll generate something new that then can go be pursued as part of an innovation portfolio.
Now, thinking about innovations and adjacencies, you've had quite a bit of experience in this, Rich. So I think there was an allusion earlier to the percentage of success that you've had. Can you speak a little bit to that and what enabled that?
Yeah, I was quoted, but hopefully you all forgot. So anyway, so just an example of adjacent. So this has been kind of my passion for the last 25 years. So I was in the imaging and printing group, incredibly profitable business in HP, 3D printing. Should we do that? That would be considered adjacent. So they're completely new customers. There is technology leverage there, but significant changes in that. So that 3D printing would be an adjacent business. And to me, the biggest regrets and the biggest successes both have been in this adjacent space. And they're just, if you start looking at it, they're just everywhere. So how is it that HP, who's right at in late 90s, early 2000s, is killing it in servers. I mean, beating IBM, beating everybody, right? So I happen to know the CTO at Amazon. He lives in the same town I did. When they decided to create AWS, which was completely by kind of accident. So how is it the person that's shipping all of the servers, not all of them, but the majority of servers into the space totally misses the fact that there's another business model where you could actually host compute. So these adjacent misses are everywhere. And it's also the place where your company or organization has the most capabilities and capacity. So it's just fascinating how this blind spot here is just all over. So that's been my passion, is how do you, and I think you just talked about an adjacency, right? How to wake up organizations. And then the second problem with adjacencies is that once they see them, they try to execute them within the core organization and processes. So, we got it. We do computers. We can host. We got data centers. We can do some data centers. Is that what we're talking about? No. Right? No. It's completely different. So it's both identifying these adjacencies, but then actually treating them more like a startup than a core business. It's not really a startup, but it's a lot of the distinctions that apply to a startup apply to an adjacent business. So anyway, long answer, but this is for anybody in large organizations. I think my bias is that this is where the gold is, period, and this is where you're going to die if you don't do it.
Let me add to that a little bit. For those of you who aren't familiar with, there's a very common framework. It goes by a name like adjacency matrix. There are many versions, but it basically says if you look at your technology, your capabilities, and you look at your markets or your channels, are they in your core or are they adjacent or they're new? And the basic theory is the further away you are from the core, the lower the probability of success. This is and everybody thinks they need to have scouts all over this thing. There's a problem with that theory, which is certainly the stuff that's new does have a high intrinsic failure rate, but it's actually not the highest failure rate. The highest failure rate is in the adjacency, because the mothership reframes the problem as core and then kills it through its own internal pressures, like a reliable promise or trying to make it consistent. It's sort of the parent-child problem. And occasionally the new gets left alone long enough that it actually happens. It's kind of through benign neglect, it can happen. So this ability to control the adjacency or really zero in on it is really, really critical. Now, one thing many companies do when they rate this matrix is they don't think big enough. The examples he gave for HP are adjacency kind of examples. But what people will do is they'll sort of reframe it and say, I'm going to tweak my chemistry so I can win this customer. That's adjacency because I don't have the SKU today. And so it's the same phenomenon of pulling into the core and pulling into the comfort zone. I think the biggest contribution that I personally make when I go into companies is just getting them to step up to their own dreams. I mean, it's just it's okay to think big. You can have a scenario that's amazing. It doesn't need to be the only scenario. And there's a lot of power in the decision analysis ability to talk about multiple scenarios, and you can have this conversation. We're not talking about the scenario you're committing to. We're talking about the dream you're trying to create. I sometimes think of this as works of fiction. It's like in innovation, you want the innovator to be telling a really fantastic, amazing story about how awesome this could be, and then figure out, is there any possibility of making that happen, right? And it's an adjacency. The problem is always stretching folks and making that safe and setting that up properly.
Lindsay, I'd like to ask you, so we were talking about 3D printing, which is a little bit near and dear to my heart. My husband just took a role in that area at HP as well, so best of luck to him. So Lindsay, just with something that is not revenue related, not directly tied to revenue, software, it's maybe a little more of a challenge to understand what the value proposition is to that. Can you talk a little bit more about how
potentially
you go about
impossible?
Doing that? Potentially impossible, especially with some of Intel's principles. No, sorry. But how can we move forward? How did you move forward? How did you get folks that are so used to advocacy or loudest voice in the room understand that you can put some kind of value on this in order to understand which items should rise to the top?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very much in the process of doing that, especially around value. Intel being a hardware engineering-driven company, coming in there and trying to show in an advocacy model where it's me, you know, I'm not a vice president. I'm not a person who has any type of organizational power. I'm more of just like, you know, enthusiastic, passionate. I did bring SmartOrg, so I had this, you know, incredible support structure and mastery of the concepts behind me. And, you know, I would even remind them, I would often say, you know, thinking fast and slow and like this stuff, it got the Nobel Prize in economics, you know, like it's real, there's real science here and there's real math. But at the end of the day, you know, like 100% the engineering managers were like comparative decision making, you know, on data quality that's good enough for us to be able to compare between alternatives, not good enough. And, you know, like you were saying, I only had my credibility. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, you only had your credibility? Like, that seems so fragile. Or like, gosh, like if I go out there as an passionate person trying to create change, and if I only have my credibility, like, and I shoot and I lose, you know, then what do I have left? Nothing, you know, I don't know. But my point is that it's I think, maybe it's different in some of the other tech companies that aren't hardware driven. For us, I think, for Intel, I think we still have a long way to go. And yeah, my journey is not over. It's still like continue to paint the picture and make the right connections inside Intel, bringing data, bringing decision quality and data analysis out of just finance and into other functional areas so that it's more of like this comprehensive capability in the organization. Anyway, it's a long journey and I think we still have a long way to go.
Great. Could I draw you out a little bit on one topic? So I think one of the things that was going on is people wanted to use value metric as a justification. So like, show me how what I'm doing is selling more hardware, and then I'm going to go justify my budget. And the idea of value as guiding choice, or as possibly giving you a sort of compass to create some cool new future, like the sort of a choice of, was probably the hardest thing to make progress on. And I wonder, well, do others encounter this? And maybe you could just sort of elaborate on this point, because it was really a radically different idea of what value was.
Yeah. But we had some fantastic conversations trying to get there, I think. You know, we ended up going and using like an internal lens with stakeholders and how they valued the work, how much they were willing to pay, right? A willing to pay model. What's your question again? Remind me.
Well, just how you dealt. I mean, there's the distinction I'm making is people want value to justify their budgets,
Yeah.
as opposed to value to make choice.
Right.
And decision analysts frame this value is about making choice, right? And so what I think you were up against was a deep-seated desire to go out and bring the evidence that's going to justify my budget. I actually don't care about the portfolio choices, right? And I think this is probably a common issue in innovation and with advocacy. And I just thought you had a nice example of it. Perhaps you could just elaborate.
I think even to this day, they still want that. They think they want that, right? Even though underneath it there has been a culture shift where they now can see lots of different alternatives, and they value that even without being able to totally recognize it as such.
I want to take that back to the credibility question, because I did a conference presentation, and I'm new to this conference. I'm always felt like a decision quality wannabe, with through my wonderful relationships. But so how that always has worked for me, and what drives me nuts about innovators inside of organizations, they use this weird language. And they expect other people to get it, like, oh, we're going to change the world, and all this stuff, right? And, okay, everybody in that organization has been hired and promoted for their operational excellence. That language doesn't work. So what language works? And it's not their problem. It's our problem. It's our problem that we're speaking that way. And we can't be heard, and we can't build credibility. So I think that what I fell in love with around decision quality is it allows me to speak in a language that they can understand, that I can talk about, how the decision is going to be made, what proof we're going to be looking at, what are the potential strategies that we're going to pursue. So that's been, just an incredible bridge between where my sort of core operates and between where I think the leadership operates. So anyway, I just wanted to distinguish that too. And that credibility isn't on how many successes I've had, because based on how the core performs, I'm lousy. I'm terrible. I'm 5x worse or whatever, right? So that's not going to do it. Even if you're amazingly successful in the adjacent space, you're always going to be way worse than the core. So you got to find other ways. And I think the language of decision science is fantastic,
So, Rich, I think maybe you just share how many shots have you taken, how many have been successful, and how many failed, just to give people a sense of what this then. And he's good at it, right?
I've got a database of about 38, so thousands of ideas on the front end, but 38 projects now that made it through the incubation and pilot phase. So we had about $5 million invested in each, so just give you a rough merit. So 38, and 20% succeeded in the sense that they met, they sort of met the target or were close to the target, that sort of thing. About 5%, were truly sort of outliers, sort of 2. But anyway, so that sounds pretty good. Although you got to realize in large organizations, the kind of assets that we have to go after this stuff is crazy, right? If we find a good idea, I can call any customer in the world. I can get on the phone with any customer in the world. I have a supply chain that runs $10 billion through it, right? I got cost structures that nobody can compete with. So if you look at what I have in my arsenal, if I can actually bring something through that actually has value and growth potential, and that we've framed it properly and we've tested it properly and so on, my ability to execute that thing is off the charts. So I don't think 20% is unreasonable at all. I think, in fact, I see peer companies now that are doing this sort of internal innovation hub things, and I think they're more like 25, 30%. So I don't think that's unreasonable.
Just a quick note, the Poll Anywhere app is up. I know it wasn't up at the very beginning, so if you tried and it wasn't working, now is a great time to go ahead and throw your questions in there. We have about 5 minutes left, so we'll get the top voted ones. So you guys are convincing me that, okay, this is possible. It's not all done through M&A. There are some great DQ, DA principles put in forward, alternatives, understanding the framing, of course, that commitment to execution, understanding where you are as an organization and what you can do, but not making that innovation part of your core business, because they aren't. So what are some of the skill sets that should be employed by the folks that are in our organizations to be innovative? What do the actual folks on the ground, not necessarily the decision maker, what kind of skills enabled each of you to be successful in innovating?
I'll go real quick. So I'll let you talk to the decision quality side. But there's a lot of great methodologies. In the last 15 years, I kind of compare this to the quality management system. So I'm that old that I was actually in the industry when Deming's quality management systems rolled through the tech sector. And there was a lot of well thought through tools around TQC and how you did that work. And Agile and all that stuff came out of Deming. So for anybody who thinks that's new, no, it's been around for a long time. But so there is a lot of cool stuff, right? Empathy-based design, design thinking. And so you gotta be on your stuff. You gotta be out there and find the best methodologies that fit for your organization from just how you do the work. And that's one thing.
I have to say creativity, right? And how do you truly enable people to be creative and give them like that incubation period or that protection from the harsh glare of the core business and that requirement to produce results quickly. How do you really, we say we want creativity, right? I mean, I think that is inside the individual, inside oneself, is there's lots of innovation. That's where, you know, a source of creativity. How do you create a place inside a fast-paced, successful business that really gives people the freedom to explore their creativity?
I just had two comments. I have this idea of a committed innovator. And when I go into organizations, they're actually littered. And many of you may, in fact, be committed innovators. And you sort of know them, and they seem to generate all kinds of interesting ideas. They're always trying to do something. They're always pushing a little bit. They're always stretching. And I think a lot in an organization is just sort of get out of their way and make that possible. Generally, they're beaten down. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I do a portfolio sweep or something, and 20% of the projects have some committed innovator that's just begging for help and has a project that's 10x what they're actually pursuing. It's really astonishing that it's there. So I think some of it's just sort of getting out of the way. But I also think there is one attribute that comes to mind which sort of makes the difference. And this is a very human element. A lot of people want to be safe, and they want to do a good job. And those people aren't going to cut it at the end of the day. I mean, they could be on a team, but they're not the one that's going to make it happen. There is some very human element of kind of taking responsibility for your own future. It's very decision analytic. It's like you have to be a person who says, I am the author of my own future. I am a leader in the company, whether or not I am in that power position. I am an agent of change, and I am willing to be vulnerable, and I am willing to be at risk. And the scary part of this actually isn't sort of the financial outcomes, getting fired or not. It's the possibility of being wrong. It's the
Or losing credibility.
Or losing credibility. I mean, you really have to go all in as a CEO of your life and be a innovator. And that seems to me to be the thing that really separates folks.
So I'm in talent insights and our human resources, basically, and understanding what can we do. People often feel safer when they're rewarded for something, and they can understand the direct line to, here's what I'm going to do because I know it's going to get me that. Granted, we should be agents for change, but help me out here. What if we tied rewarding individuals to portfolio performance rather than individual performance or individual project performance? What are your thoughts on that?
It would foster teamwork, right? And instead of individuals competing against each other or teams competing against each other for a budget, for a specific budget.
So I think those things can help.
Okay.
And sort of get out of the way. But I don't. The people who really step up and change something aren't the ones that are motivated by the petty manipulations of HR. These are the people who are. I mean, sorry. I mean, it's like, are you or are you not going to make a difference? What do you want to do with your life? What are your dreams? I mean, it's really much more at that level. Mm-hmm. And I think getting out of the way, it's about truth-telling, it's about authenticity. That's actually the nut to crack. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's in HR and elsewhere that just takes the friction out of the system. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
right?
And at some level,
that's not really the issue.
Like authenticity, is it a skill that can be taught?
It can be role modeled, right?
Sure. I actually think it can be taught, given the right conditions. But I mean, you're talking about really a skill set. Certainly, there's like 1 in a million corporate HR organizations that actually have any type of program that would teach that or instill it or foster it. Again, we say we want it, but there's no how-to really that's ever provided in any kind of training. Do I think it exists in the world? Yes. Do I think that it's really part of corporate learning and development? No.
And we tie that back to culture, right? It's all about enabling the appropriate culture to ensure and foster innovation. Good. We had another question here on Lindsay, can you please talk to mindfulness and how that has helped you in the process? And should that be one of the skill sets, in addition to design thinking, other areas that we should adopt here?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, what does it mean to be authentic? So, I mean, when I was just saying what I was just saying about authenticity, can it be taught? Yes. I'm thinking about mindfulness. How do you become authentic? Anyone have any ideas? Well, it starts with looking within and self-understanding, self-awareness, self-aware leadership. How do you create that? You're going to have to create some sort of practice that gives people the rigor of introspection, right? The space for that. I mean, mindfulness, yeah, in whatever capacity, I think, introspection is an important part of the human experience that we don't create enough room for in our lives. Dr. Dan Siegel out of UCLA, he's an interpersonal neurobiologist, and he has this healthy mind platter, and he says there's 7 different activities that we should really cycle through in a given day, and one of them is this time within. Now, if I were to ask you how many of you have like a dedicated 10 minutes a day that you have for introspection, probably not very many people would raise their hands. I mean, and mindfulness is really just one avenue that enables that capacity and that opportunity. And when we the thing about bringing it into the corporate space is that you create a safe, structured way of doing it that's inside people's workday, and it's like not another thing that they have to add on to their life, are already highly, very, very, very busy modern lives, especially if you have 2 small children.
Could I just add, there's something to this point about authenticity. I think what really brings people down, I bet every one of you in this room has a kind of dream, and you are you're afraid to pursue it fundamentally. It's certainly true for me. I'll say that, and I would guess it's pretty much true for everybody in here. And things that get in our way, one of the main things is the little chatter, the voice that you might not be good enough, or that you're going to get punished. It's all this internal stuff is one of the huge barriers to just being an author. And I think if you can meditate, you learn that you are not your thoughts. You don't have to react to them. It gives you a space to choose. It's really incredibly decision analytic. It's the interpersonal version of decision quality, which is open that mental space to actually choose as opposed to react. And in that space is your chance to be your author. So I think it just... it probably is a practical step that could be done.
Good. So bringing this back to our middle managers, maybe Rich, you can take a stab at this too. How can we train our middle managers to identify and support entrepreneurs and innovators? How do we help others in our organization lift us all up?
I think modeling is the way to go. Change happens from within. I really feel that the discipline associated with decision quality, when we applied those principles inside of HP, or when I use them with my clients, or when I use them in Oregon State, I never say, hey, we're doing decision quality now, get on board. They see a tornado diagram, they're like, wow, what's that? And pretty soon they're insisting on, well, how could I make a decision on this next opportunity if I don't have a tornado diagram? So, so much of this is just modeling it, because everybody wants things to work better and more efficiently. I'm sure there's a few people that are, stuck in their ways or needing control or needing ego stroking or whatever, but most people that I've worked with, if they see a better way to do it, they're excited, and they don't really, and most of them don't care. I've been surprised how few people have asked me, where did you get some of that stuff? No, they're thinking about the decision. They're in the moment of that, what they're doing, and so I think just modeling, and just don't be afraid to do it, and don't ask for permission to do it. Don't say, well, we're going to do some framing now. No, just frame, just do it, and you don't need to be. Sponsorship's fine, but it comes and goes, so whatever, just do it.
Nice.
For Nike? Do you work for Nike?
Home state, though, right?
Yeah, home state.
Exactly. Well, great. There's some other questions here from the audience that I'd love to get to. I think we're doing all right on time. I've got a couple different times in front of me, so I'm just going to take the one that serves me best. This is my alternatives, and I chose the one with highest value. Hopefully it's high value for all of you as well. But just thinking about everything that's been said today, right? If we're thinking about all of the different skill sets we have, what actually makes us work in an organization, how to speak to decision makers, how to help others below us, enable them to be authentic and true, and be the leader and clear their own path as well. Try and pull this all together. If there is one thing that each of you would love for this audience to take away with them, to leave DAG and say, I'm going to innovate, and here's my little snippet that I'm holding in my pocket, what would that be? In any order is fine.
I know this is one of the heuristics of decision quality, but just because it's really hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
And Lindsay, just real quick, so what was the most difficult thing for you personally as you went through this process of innovation management in a portfolio setting?
Oh, I mean, personally, it was like the advocacy nature of Intel, in that it was like me, Lindsay, driving this thing. You know, it wasn't about decision quality really as a whole.
But the culture shift of decision quality into that organization made it difficult, but you said, I'm going with it. You know it will work.
Yeah. And trying to really understand the different components of our little lens on a very large business. Like, I don't know, just break like product truth and all this language that we really didn't have before. Decision quality absolutely brought in a different taxonomy that at first was very abrupt and people were highly allergic to it. And now 2 years later, it's commonplace. Like it actually did, even though again, people are very reluctant to formally say, yes, we're doing decision quality. The roots, the seeds that we planted have grown, and you have different language and people talking about things in a different way.
Nice.
I was thinking about your question, advice to this group. So I think if you are interested in being a decision support professional to support innovators, I think you first of all have to really, there's a decision, I guess, internally to really deeply be of service to these people. And I think that means don't lead with the framework. That means we are not in this domain. These folks have so many barriers, and our tools are incredibly powerful. It's not about teaching them decision quality. It's about being of service through decision quality. Help them see bigger, better futures. Help them understand what uncertainties actually move the needle. Help them clarify from the task list of 1,000 things they have to do, which 3 actually make the difference. And our tools are powerful. And I have certainly found in my innovation journey that just there's a funny combination of caring less about decision quality and turning up the heat on the critical thinking contribution has been sort of my path. And all of you would have to find your own. But generally speaking, it's much lighter touch in terms of the tools and the obstacles you put in front. But for me, it's a deep commitment to be of service to the innovator, help them create something awesome.
Thank you.
And I would say thank you for your deep service. I appreciate it greatly. I mean, come on, we only get one spin of the wheel here. I mean, as far as our lives go, yeah, we got to pay mortgages and stuff. But, I mean, looking back at the things that I tried that didn't work, I mean, I get great joy, I get great pleasure in the few that worked, great, and the relationships I built and the customers I served. I mean, my God, I wouldn't do it. I mean, just, how could you not want to do that? I mean, it's just so cool. It's so cool to have that opportunity to go create things that haven't been created before. And so that I can't not do it. There's no possibility that I can stop in that way. But my barrier has been truth to power, and it's always been, we'll call it a lack of courage, whatever you want to call it, but it's been truth to power in those moments of advocacy. Can I speak the truth to that decision maker? And so this is bullshit. This is not going to work. And so, DQ's helped me there because I have a way where it's just not ego versus ego, where I can find that courage in a way to express what needs to change, and so it's been very helpful. But I mean, just go for it. I mean, it's too much fun otherwise.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you all. I appreciate having you here today. Let's give them a round of applause, and innovate can be done. Thank you.